They made Maren Dusk count the empty mercy beds with her wedding ring already removed. Not by her hand, by decree. The ring lay on a silver plate beside the shelter ledger, cold enough that frost had formed along its inner curve. No one in the Pack Winter shelter looked at it for long. A cast-off Luna's ring was dangerous to pity. It reminded people that a woman could share a throne for 7 winters, feed its poor through 3 famines, bury its fever dead, and still be reduced to an accusation before noon. The shelter hall smelled of smoke, wool, old medicine, and snow dragged in from the boots of noble witnesses. 40 mercy beds stood in 2 long rows beneath the rafters, each covered with a winter blanket embroidered in the Rhov Pack crest. They had once glowed faintly with gold heat when the sick, the abandoned, or the hunted lay upon them. The winter mercy beds did not answer pity. They answered shelter given when law had refused it. Now the beds sat empty because Lady Yselle Kain had arrived with donor accounts, debt ledgers, and enough beautiful sorrow to poison a room. "Maren Dusk," Yselle said, standing beside the central hearth in white fur and pearl-grey silk. "You were entrusted with the shelter's mercy funds. Yet the beds are empty, the poor are missing, and the Pack's winter donations cannot be traced." Maren stood at the foot of the first bed with her hands folded before her. She did not look like a woman ruined. That offended them most. Her dark hair was bound simply at the nape of her neck. Her gown was plain winter blue, the color former Lunas wore when they were no longer permitted royal black. Her face held no tears, only a stillness so disciplined that the court mistook it for ice. Lady Yselle turned to the witnesses. Coldness is easier to hide when dressed as dignity. A few nobles murmured agreement. Maren looked at the first bed. She knew who had slept there last. Old Marda Vale, whose sons had sold her blanket rights to a debt house after her hands stopped spinning wool fast enough. Maren had hidden her in the West smokehouse for 6 nights, then sent her south under a flower cart with a name token sewn into her sleeve. The bed had warmed so fiercely that night the snow melted beneath its legs. But the ledger said empty. The ledger had been rewritten. Alpha King Rhaelor Rhov stood near the far doors, surrounded by wolf guards and winter light. He had not sat. That was a mercy or a punishment. Maren had not decided which. Rhaelor looked exactly as he had the morning he removed her from the lunar dais. Tall, broad-shouldered, black-haired, with a face cut by command, and eyes the color of steel under ice. His royal wolf shadow stood behind him, massive and dark, but its breath smoked white in the shelter air, though no other wolves did. Maren noticed. She always noticed what cold did to the living. Rhaelor's gaze held hers for one breath too long. Then Lady Yselle opened the shelter ledger. "The Alpha King believed you used charity as a political weapon," she said. "Today the shelter will show the truth. Count the beds, Maren. Count what your mercy left behind." Maren did not move. Yselle smiled faintly. "Begin." The first noble stepped forward before Maren could answer. Lord Carven, whose name appeared on 3 public donation stones outside the shelter, placed his jeweled hand on the nearest bed frame. The blanket turned white. Frost shot across the mattress, climbed the pillow, and sealed the embroidered crest beneath a skin of ice. Lord Carven jerked back with a curse. The hall went silent. Yselle's smile thinned. "A winter charm reaction," she said quickly. "The beds have been neglected." Another noble tried the second bed. It froze harder. The third bed froze before anyone touched it. Then the fourth. One by one, the winter mercy beds went pale and dead under noble nearness. Frost spread across the rows like a verdict no one had asked to hear. The hearth dimmed. The wolves at the door lowered their heads. Even Rhaelor's royal shadow stepped back, as if the cold in the room had recognized something older than weather. Maren closed her eyes. Not from fear, from recognition. The beds remembered. Yselle turned sharply. "Count!" Maren opened her eyes. No. A sound moved through the witnesses. Rhaelor's head lifted. Yselle's voice sharpened. "You refuse the Alpha King's inquiry?" "I refuse to count beds for shame," Maren said. "Beds were never the mercy." Yselle's face hardened. Rhaelor stepped forward at last. His voice was low enough that the rafters seemed to listen. Then what were they? Maren looked at him. Once, he had asked her questions in private before he believed anyone else's answers. Once, his wolf had slept beside the shelter hearth while she changed fever cloths by hand. Then Yselle's reports had arrived, and Rhaelor had learned to call distance wisdom. The lives, Maren said. His jaw tightened. She turned to the first frozen bed and laid her bare hand on the iced blanket. The entire shelter held its breath. Marder Vale, Maren said. 70, 2 winters, spinner, 3 sons living, sold by debt claim after her hands failed. Gold light bloomed under the frost. It began small, no larger than a candle under wool. Then the whole bed warmed. Ice ran off the blanket in clear streams. Steam rose from the pillow. The Rhov crest glowed, not silver, not royal blue, but deep winter gold. The wolves at the door whined. Rhaelor went orderly still. Maren moved to the second bed. Ansel Reed, she said. Quarry worker. Left leg crushed. Declared unfit. Debt house marked him for bone labor. The second bed warmed. A noble woman pressed a hand to her mouth. Maren stepped to the third. Mirith Fenn, widow. Accused of shelter fraud after refusing Lord Carvin's winter bond. The third bed ignited gold. Lord Carvin stumbled back. Yselle's face had lost color. Maren did not look at her. She walked down the row, naming the missing one by one. Rejected elders, injured workers, widows with debt brands hidden under sleeves. Banished women who had arrived at night with frost in their hair and terror in their throats. Every name made a bed warm. Every bed exposed the lie that emptiness meant abandonment. By the 10th name, the shelter was glowing in broken rows of gold. By the 15th, Rhaelor had taken one step toward her without seeming to know he had moved. Maren stopped before the 16th bed. This one did not glow when she touched it. It did not freeze either. It waited. Maren's fingers trembled for the first time. Yselle saw. So did Rhaelor. The Alpha King's voice came quieter now. Who slept there? Maren looked down at the still dark bed. Then the shelter answered before she did. A copper debt tag slid from beneath the pillow and struck the floor at Rhaelor's feet. It was stamped with no name, only a shelter number Maren had buried from the ledger herself. The copper tag did not stop moving when it hit the floor. It rolled once across the shelter boards, struck the leg of the silver plate, and spun beneath the cold ring Maren had once worn as Luna. The sound was small, thin, almost nothing. Still, every wolf in the Packwinter shelter heard it. Rhaelor looked down at the tag. No name, only a stamped shelter number. 16. Lady Yselle recovered before anyone else did. That was one of her gifts. Fear passed through her face quickly and came out dressed as authority. There, she said. Concealed beneficiary record. Maren Dusk hid shelter entries while claiming empty beds. This is exactly what the donor inquiry warned. A few nobles stirred, eager to return to a shape they understood. Theft, misuse, hidden accounts. Those were cleaner than mercy. Maren did not bend for the tag. She looked at the 16th bed. It remained dark, neither frozen nor warm. Waiting. Yselle stepped toward the silver plate. The former Luna buried names from the lawful ledger. She moved bodies, funds, and winter supplies beyond pack oversight. Read the hidden ledger, Maren said. The words cut through the room. Yselle turned. There is no hidden ledger. Yes, Maren said. There is, beneath the lower board of the 6th supply chest, wrapped in smoke cloth, sealed with plain wax because noble seals were the first thing debt houses learned to follow. The old shelter steward near the hearth went pale. Rhaelor saw it. His voice lowered. Steward. The man bowed with shaking hands. There is a chest, my king. Yselle laughed softly. A desperate woman can invent a chest. Then open it, Maren said. No one moved at first. Not because they doubted the order, because the room had begun to understand that every object here might remember more than the witnesses had wanted known. Rhaelor turned to one of his guards. Open the 6th supply chest. Yselle moved toward the silver plate instead. Her hand reached for Maren's ring. No one touches the ring, Rhaelor said. The room went still. Yselle froze with her fingers above the frost. For one dangerous breath, Maren almost looked at him as if that mattered. Then she remembered the plate, the decree, the morning he had let another woman name her cold before the beds she had kept warm. She looked at Rhaelor and said, "You protect the symbol now because you failed the shelter then." His face changed. Not enough to heal anything. Enough to bleed. "Yes," he said. The answer silenced the nobles more thoroughly than denial would have. At the 6th chest, the guard pried up the lower board. Smoke cloth lay beneath it, blackened at the edges from old hearth ash. Inside was a thin ledger, not bound in royal leather, not stamped with the Rhov crest, but sewn from scraps of flour, sack, and shelter cloth. Yselle's mouth tightened. Maren held out her hand. Rhaelor took the ledger from the guard, but he did not give it to Yselle. He crossed the hall and placed it in Maren's hands himself, carefully, as if returning something he had no right to own. Maren opened it. The pages were not arranged by donation amount, not by noble house, not by rank, blood, age, usefulness, or pack value. They were arranged by danger, debt house claim, predatory bond offer, widow seizure notice, invalid worker transfer, banished woman recovery order. Maren turned the first page. Marda Vale, public ledger marked her absent from shelter. Hidden ledger records transfer to South Mill Hearth under flower cart escort. The first bed warmed brighter. She turned another page. Ansel Reed, public ledger marked him discharged. Hidden ledger records dead house attempt to reclaim him for bone labor. Shelter team moved him through the old wool tunnel. The second bed glowed. Yselle's voice sharpened. Those entries prove illegal relocation. They prove shelter, Maren said. They prove you removed pack dependents from lawful debt recovery. Maren looked up. Debt recovery is what nobles call it when poverty has already been sold twice. The winter mercy beds answered. Not with light this time, with sound. A low groan passed through the wooden frames, like old sleepers turning under blankets. Rhaelor looked toward the rows. His wolf shadow stood rigid behind him, white breath smoking harder now. Maren read faster, name after name. Not all dramatic, not all innocent in a storybook way. Some had debts, some had failed oaths. Some had stolen bread, broken work contracts, fled harsh households, refused forced winter bonds, or struck back when hands reached too far. But none had been given shelter law, only debt law, and debt law had teeth. Then Maren reached the 16th entry. There was no name, only the same number stamped on the copper tag, Shelter 16. Yselle's eyes flickered toward Lord Carven. Maren saw it. So did Rhaelor. He stepped closer to the bed. Why no name? Because the name had already been bought, Maren said. The words moved through the shelter like cold water under a door. Yselle lifted her chin. Absurd. Maren turned the ledger so the court could see the blank space where a name should have been. Debt houses began buying shelter names from donor lists. If a widow, worker, or elder entered under a true name, the reclaim notice arrived before dawn. If I buried the name, they lived long enough to leave. Lord Carven snapped. You accuse noble donors of selling mercy rolls? No, Maren said. The ledger does. She touched the 16th bed again. It still did not glow. Instead, the mattress split open along one seam. A folded strip of donor parchment slid out. Rhaelor picked it up before any noble could reach it. His eyes scanned the mark at the bottom. His face went colder than the room. What is it? Yselle asked. Maren already knew. Rhaelor turned the parchment toward the witnesses. Beneath the scraped shelter number, under a layer of pearl-gray wax, Lord Carven's donor seal was pressed into the debt transfer line. And above it, almost hidden in the fold, was Yselle Kain's pearl mark. Outside the pack winter shelter, the noble donation stones began to crack. The sound came through the walls in 3 hard snaps. Every witness turned toward the doors. The stones had stood along the front path for 20 winters, each carved with a noble house name and the amount of winter mercy publicly given. They were smooth, expensive, and useless against cold. Maren had walked past them for years with flour under her nails and fever smoke in her hair while donors admired their own names in moonlight. Now the first stone split down the center, then the second, then the third. Lord Carvan went pale. "Those stones are consecrated." "No," Maren said, still holding the hidden ledger. "They are advertised." The 16th bed remained dark behind her, the copper tag lying below it like a small wound the floor refused to swallow. Lady Yselle Kain drew herself taller. "This is shelter corruption, hidden names, secret transfers, false entries, a cast-off Luna moving pack dependence beyond lawful reach." Maren turned one page of the ledger. "Lawful reach?" "Yes," Yselle said. "Debt houses operate under royal license." Rhaelor's wolf shadow exhaled white beside the far doors. Maren looked at him then. "Under whose seal?" Silence entered the shelter. "Not peace. Danger." Rhaelor did not answer quickly enough. That told her enough. Yselle stepped into the gap. "The Alpha King cannot read every debt recovery claim in winter. That is why noble stewards and donor officers exist. And that is how people disappear politely," Maren said. The nearest mercy bed groaned again, wood bending under an invisible sleeper. Rhaelor's eyes moved to it. Maren saw him begin to understand the shape of the shelter he had allowed others to manage. He had not sold the names himself. That was not absolution. Power did not need to hold the knife to open the room where knives were kept. Yselle pointed to the hidden ledger. If those names were honest, why bury them? Maren lifted the copper tag. Its number had begun to warm against her fingers, not gold, not forgiving, only alive with record. Because a name in the public ledger became a purchase mark. Lord Carvan's Snarle, lease. Maren held up the donor parchment from the 16th bed. This tag was not proof of theft. It was proof someone had been sold twice. The words landed harder than accusation. Rhaelor took the parchment from her. This time, he did not snatch authority back into his own hands. He turned it toward the shelter steward. "Read the transfer line." The old steward swallowed. "Shelter 16 entered under winter protection. Name withheld." "Continue," Rhaelor said. The steward's voice shook. "Protection right purchased by Carvan House Donation Office." Lord Carvan lunged forward. "That parchment is forged." The 16th bed froze from frame to pillow. Not because Maren touched it, because he did. Frost climbed Lord Carvan's boots so fast he stumbled backward with a cry. The shelter answered with one line carved in ice across the bed frame. "Sold after shelter entry." No one breathed. Yselle recovered with a blade hidden in silk. Even if one donor officer abused a claim, Maren had no authority to conceal people from the crown. Maren closed the ledger. That sound was softer than a slap and more final. "I concealed them from you." Yselle's expression did not change. Her eyes did. Rhaelor saw it. At last, Maren turned to him. "Ask her why every reclaim notice arrived within a day of a new shelter entry." Rhaelor looked at Yselle. "Answer." Yselle gave a controlled bow of the head. "Because mercy must be audited." "By debt houses?" Maren asked. "By lawful creditors. Creditors who bought widow names from donor lists?" Yselle's mouth tightened. "You keep saying widow as if grief cancels debt." Maren stepped toward her. Rhaelor shifted once, not in front of Maren, but alert enough that every guard saw where his attention had gone. Maren noticed. She did not thank him. "Grief does not cancel debt," she said. "Neither does hunger, neither does age. Neither does a crushed leg or a dead husband or a winter bond refused before witnesses. That is why shelter law existed before noble mercy renamed it charity." The winter mercy beds warmed beneath that last word. Not bright, not dramatic. A low gold pulse moved from one bed frame to another, like banked coals remembering they had once been fire. Rhaelor stared at the rose. Maren did not let him hide there. You let Yselle turn shelter law into donor honor, she said. You let her bring pearl wax into a place that was meant to answer need, not noble reputation. His face tightened. I did. The admission was not enough, but it was not nothing. Yselle turned sharply. My king, she is forcing you to confess under a shelter charm. No, Rhaelor said, voice cold. She is naming what I should have read. For the first time, Yselle's mask cracked fully, only for a heartbeat. Then she smiled. It was worse. If the hidden ledger is true, she said, then call the protected ones back. Maren went still. Yselle looked around the shelter, letting the witnesses follow her trap. Let them stand before the beds. Let them confirm they were hidden, moved, fed, and clothed with unapproved winter stores. Unless, of course, they cannot appear because Maren never saved them at all. The nobles shifted toward agreement. A clever trap. If Maren refused, the ledger looked invented. If she called them back, she exposed every person she had moved beyond Dead House reach. The beds dimmed. They knew the shape of sacrifice when law demanded names. Rhaelor's hand closed around the parchment. No protected name will be forced open in this hall. Maren looked at him. His voice lowered. I should have said that before today. Yes, she said. You should have. He accepted the cut. Yselle's smile chilled. Then the inquiry has no living witness. The shelter doors blew open. Snow swept across the floor, carrying ash, wool threads, and a strip of red debt paper torn into 5 pieces. A woman stood outside in the storm, hood pulled low, one hand braced against the cracked donation stones. Behind her came others. An elder with a spinner's crooked fingers, a quarryman leaning on a carved crutch, 3 widows in grey travel cloaks, banished women with old debt brands hidden beneath fresh wool. Maren's breath caught. She had sent them away to live. They had come back to witness. The first woman lowered her hood. Old Mardervale looked past Rhaelor, past Yselle, past every noble who had bought mercy in public and sold names in private. We are not missing, she said. We are alive. Gold fire climbed the central hearth without touching the wood. It rose behind Maren like light, remembering how to be warm. The people at the shelter doors did not enter at first. They stood in the storm with snow on their shoulders and road weariness in their bones, looking at the place that had saved them and the nobles who had nearly sold them back. Old Mardervale leaned on a cane carved from smokehouse oak. Ansel Reed stood beside her with one hand gripping his crutch. Myrith Fenn kept her hood low, but Maren recognized the scar at her wrist where a winter bond had once been forced too tight. Maren's throat closed. You should not have come back, she said. Marder's crooked fingers tightened around the cane. You sent us away to live. That does not mean we leave you to be buried. The first mercy bed warmed so fiercely, its blanket lifted with steam. Yselle stepped forward at once. This is unlawful assembly. Ansel Reed gave a rough laugh. That is what they called shelter, too. Several nobles recoiled as the returned people entered. Not because they were dangerous, because they were proof with faces. Maren saw Rhaelor watching them, not as a king counting dependents. As a man seeing the cost of believing paper over hands, Yselle turned to him. My king, these people admit they were concealed from lawful debt recovery. Whatever sentiment the shelter inspires, Maren Dusk moved crown dependents outside registered oversight. Marder spat onto the floor. A few nobles gasped. Maren almost smiled. Almost. Rhaelor did not look away from Yselle. Let them speak. They are debt fugitives. They are shelter witnesses. The difference settled over the hall like a drawn blade. Yselle's face chilled. You cannot rewrite law because the beds glow. Maren stepped between the rows. The beds are not rewriting law. They are remembering who the law refused. One by one, the returned people moved toward the beds. Marder touched the first frame. Gold heat bloomed around her hand. My son signed my blanket rights to Carven House after I stopped spinning wool fast enough. Maren hid me when the dead men came. Ansel laid his crutch beside the second bed. The quarry broke my leg. The workmaster marked me useless, then sold my debt to bone labor. Maren sent me through the wool tunnel. Myrith Fen lifted her sleeve, showing the healed mark of a torn bond clasp. Lord Carven offered winter protection. When I refused his bed, his steward called it fraud. Maren gave me another name until I could leave. Lord Carven lunged forward. Lies from beggars. Every bed near him froze. The frost stopped at his boots. Rhaelor saw it. So did everyone else. Yselle lifted a folded writ from her sleeve. Enough. If the cast-off Luna wishes witnesses, then let the crown hear lawful record. Maren looked at the writ. Her stomach tightened before the wax came into view. Black-blue, Roll Royal Winter Seal, Rhaelor's seal. Yselle unfolded it with careful hands. By Winter Emergency Authority, all persons concealed from debt review under Pack Winter Shelter Protection may be reclaimed for audit, labor reassignment, or creditor settlement before moonfall. The warmth in the room thinned. The returned people went still. Maren looked at Rhaelor. He stared at the seal as if a dead thing had opened its eyes. Yselle's voice softened. You sign this after famine winter, my king, to prevent false shelter claims from draining pack stores. Rhaelor did not answer. Maren did. And you used it to hunt the people the shelter was built to protect. Yselle's eyes flashed. I used law to preserve order. You used hunger to make mercy searchable. The hearth flared gold. Rhaelor reached for the writ. Yselle held it just beyond his hand. Careful. If you void emergency authority now, you admit the crown enabled concealment for 7 winters. Maren turned on him before he could speak. Do not make this about your shame. The hall stopped breathing. Rhaelor's gaze lifted to House. Maren's voice stayed quiet. If you protect them only because the shelter exposed you, you are still protecting your name first. The words cut him cleanly. He accepted them. Then he held out his hand to Yselle. Give me the writ. My king. Now. She gave it. Rhaelor looked at the seal. His wolf shadow behind him exhaled white, trembling as if the cold inside it recognized its own source. I signed this, he said. No one spoke. I did not ask who would be hunted by it. Maren did not soften. Good. He needed the truth with its teeth still in. Rhaelor placed the writ on the silver plate beside Maren's removed ring. No debt officer touches anyone in this shelter until every reclaim notice is read against the hidden ledger. Yselle smiled faintly, then read them. That smile made Maren cold. The shelter doors slammed open again. This time no survivors stood outside. Debt officers did. 6 men in grey wolf-hide coats entered through the snow, each carrying a black reclaim chain and a packet of sealed notices. Their captain bowed to Rhaelor, then to Yselle. Not enough to hide which bow came first. My king, he said, we are here for the unregistered shelter bodies. The mercy beds went dark, not frozen, dark. Maren looked at the first packet in the captain's hand. Pearl grey wax sealed every notice. Underneath it, faint but visible, was the pressed mark of the Rhov Winter Authority. The shelter ledger opened by itself in Maren's hands. Across the blank 16th entry, gold letters burned upward. Reclaim notice issued before shelter entry. The debt officers did not look surprised. That was the first thing Maren noticed. Not the black reclaim chains hanging from their gloved hands. Not the pearl grey wax sealing every notice. Not even the Rhov winter mark pressed beneath Yselle's private color. Their faces were calm. Men did not look calm when they arrived to discover a legal mistake. They looked calm when they had been sent to collect what they already believed was theirs. The captain of the debt officers stepped over the threshold and bowed again, this time more carefully to Rhaelor. My king, we come under winter emergency authority to retrieve unregistered shelter bodies for audit. Mardervale made a sound low in her throat. Ansel's hand tightened on his crutch. The returned women moved closer together. Not behind Maren, but near enough that she could feel their fear warming the air. They had escaped once. That did not make chains less terrifying when they returned with royal wax. Rhaelor's voice went flat. No chain is raised in this shelter. The captain paused. Yselle's eyes sharpened. Maren looked at Rhaelor. You forbid the chain now because you let your seal teach it where to walk. His jaw tightened. Yes, he said. The answer cost him less than the truth had cost the people standing behind her, but at least he did not turn from it. Maren opened the hidden ledger to the 16th entry. Gold letters still burned across the blank space. Reclaim notice issued before shelter entry. Yselle stepped forward. A clerical sequence error. Debt houses file notices in advance during famine season. It prevents false names. Maren looked at her. It prevents people from arriving unnamed enough to live. The 16th bed creaked, still dark. Still waiting. Rhaelor held out his hand to the debt captain. First notice. The captain hesitated. Wrong answer. Rhaelor's wolf shadow lifted its head, white breath pouring from its jaws. The captain handed over the packet. Rhaelor broke the pearl-grey wax and unfolded the notice. His eyes moved across the lines. The more he read, the colder his face became. Shelter 16, he said. Body class. Widowed female. Debt uncertain. Winter claim pending. Reclaim rights purchased before arrival. A noblewoman whispered, Before arrival? Maren looked toward the dark bed. Before she had a name in any shelter book. Yselle's voice cut in. That proves Maren's concealment was anticipated because fraud was known. No, Maren said. It proves the shelter number was sold before the person reached the door. The winter mercy beds answered. Not with gold, with memory. One by one, thin lines of frost appeared above the bed frames, forming marks in the air. Not names, numbers. Shelter numbers sold, transferred, traded, and reclaimed before living bodies had even lain down. 40 beds, 40 numbers. The nobles stared at them as if arithmetic had become accusation. Maren's voice lowered. You counted beds because numbers are easier than people. The hearth burned blue at the center. Rhaelor turned to the debt captain. Who sold shelter access? The captain looked at Yselle, only for a heartbeat. Enough? Yselle smiled sadly. Collectors often misunderstand donor office procedure. Maren laughed once. It held no humor. Read the donor line. Yselle Kain Mercy Office. Carven Winterstone. Reclaim priority transferred to Grey Mantle Debt House. Lord Carven backed away from the nearest bed. It froze behind him before his boot finished moving. Yselle's voice turned harder. Maren Dusk had no right to create a private kingdom of hidden dependence under the shelter roof. Maren stepped toward the debt officers, the hidden ledger held against her chest. I did not create a kingdom. I kept a roof. You stole workers from lawful settlement. I hid people from being sold twice. Debt is not cruelty. No, Maren said. But cruelty learned to write debt. The mercy beds warmed faintly then, not bright enough to comfort, only enough to say they remembered. One debt officer, younger than the rest, stared at the warmed bed near Marda. His chain dipped. Yselle noticed. Officer. He straightened. Too late. Maren saw the shame before he buried it. You have read these numbers before. The young officer swallowed. The captain snapped. Hold your tongue. Rhaelor turned. Answer her. The officer's eyes went to the floor. Some numbers came with donor notes before winter intake. How many? Rhaelor asked. The officer did not answer. Maren did. All the empty ones. Silence broke across the shelter. Yselle's face finally lost its softness. Maren opened the hidden ledger wider. The beds are empty because the people lived. Because I moved them before the reclaim chains arrived. Because every public name became a handle for a debt house. The first mercy bed flared gold around Marda. The second around Ansel. The third around Myrith. The dark 16th bed remained unchanged. Rhaelor stared at it. Why will that one not warm? Maren's fingers tightened around the ledger. Yselle answered first, and that was her mistake, because there was no person. Maren looked at her. The shelter seemed to lean closer. What did you say? Yselle recovered. I said the entry was false. No, Maren said quietly. You said there was no person. The dark bed split at the seam again. This time, no parchment slid out. A strip of winter blue cloth emerged, folded into a square and sealed with plain wax. Maren's own wax. Her hand shook when she took it. Rhaelor noticed, but did not reach. Good. She broke the seal. Inside lay a single line in her handwriting. Shelter 16 left unnamed because claimant was inside donor house before winter opening. Rhaelor's face changed. Inside whose house? The answer came from the bed itself. Gold fire burst through the mattress so violently every noble stepped back. The frost above the frame reshaped into a name at last. Not the protected woman's name. The house that had held her, Kain House. The pearl-grey curtains above Yselle's witness chair stiffened with frost. Not the beds. Not the hearth. The curtains. A delicate noble thing, sewn for ceremony, useless against winter, suddenly turned hard as frozen linen while gold light from the 16th bed burned across the shelter floor. Yselle did not look at them. That was how Maren knew she understood. Every noble in the pack winter shelter had seen the name shaped in frost above the bed. Not a person's name, a house name, Yselle's house. The one that had arrived with donor ledgers, pearl wax, debt officers, and grief polished into accusation. Rhaelor stepped toward the glowing bed. Who was Shelter 16? Maren closed the hidden ledger. Yselle seized the silence. You hear her. She cannot answer. She invented an entry, hid a number, and now refuses to name the body because there was never one. Maren looked at her. You still think names belong to whoever can use them fastest. The 16th bed warmed, low and fierce. Rhaelor turned to Maren. His voice was quieter now, but no less dangerous. Is Shelter 16 alive? Maren's fingers tightened around the ledger. Yes. Relief moved through the returned people behind her. Yselle's smile sharpened. Then bring her forward. No. The answer came without hesitation. A few nobles murmured. Even Rhaelor's wolf shadow lifted its head. Yselle spread her hands, almost gentle. There. The entire fraud speaks for itself. She claims mercy, but withholds the witness. She claims life, but hides the person. She asks the shelter to trust a hidden ledger over lawful testimony. Maren stepped to the 16th bed and laid the ledger on its gold-warmed blanket. She survived because no one in this room was given her true name, Maren said. I will not sell it now to make nobles comfortable believing me. The bed frame pulsed. The winter mercy beds did not answer pity. They answered shelter given when law had refused it. Rhaelor heard the rule in the room even before the bed reacted. Maren saw it cross his face, the beginning of understanding, and the pain of being late to it. Yselle turned toward him. My king, if concealed identities may overrule royal inquiry, every debt fugitive in the north will claim shelter protection. Maren's eyes stayed on Rhaelor. If royal inquiry requires the vulnerable to expose themselves before the people who bought their names, then inquiry is only another reclaim chain. The young debt officer lowered his gaze. Yselle saw and snapped. You are dismissed from witness standing. Rhaelor's head turned. He is not. The shelter went still. Yselle's eyes narrowed. My king? He remains. You would take testimony from a debt officer compromised by emotion? Rhaelor's voice cooled. I took yours for months. The cut landed. Maren did not smile. She would not let one clean line erase 7 winters of failure. The young officer swallowed. Shelter 16 was entered before winter opening. The notice came from Kain House, not Greymantle. It was marked household retention. Yselle's voice went soft. Careful. That single word told more truth than a shouted confession. Rhaelor stepped closer to the officer. What does household retention mean? The officer looked ill. It means the claimant was already inside a donor house, and could be reassigned before public shelter intake. Marda Vale hissed through her teeth, kept warm until sail. The 16th bed flared. The gold light spread upward into a shape above the blanket. Not a face. Maren was grateful for that. The shelter had more mercy than the court. It showed only what the witness could bear without being stripped bare. A pair of adult hands appeared in the light, raw from winter work, tying a strip of blue cloth around a wrist, then a cup of broth being pushed away by a jeweled hand, then a pearl-grey account cord being looped around that same wrist. Yselle turned sharply away. Too late. Rhaelor saw. So did the shelter. Maren's voice dropped. Kain House held her before the winter shelter opened. When she refused debt bond, the donor office filed a reclaim notice under a number instead of a name. If I entered her publicly, the chain would arrive before the bed warmed. Yselle faced her again, color high in her cheeks. And so you stole her. I sheltered her. You moved a person under crown protection. No, Maren said. I moved her from noble possession to shelter law. Rhaelor closed his eyes once. When he opened them, there was no absolution in his face, only consequence. Yselle Kain, he said, did your house submit reclaim notice for Shelter 16 before intake? Yselle drew herself straight. My house submitted many notices under delegated winter authority. Mercy cannot become a tunnel for stolen labor. Maren looked at the returned women. Hear that? They did. All of them. The word labor moved through them like old cold returning. Yselle continued, if Maren Dusk is allowed to define shelter without donor oversight, the entire winter system collapses. No, Maren said, your market collapses. The mercy beds glowed in a single low wave. Rhaelor looked at the black reclaim chains in the debt officer's hands. Drop them. The captain stiffened. My king, the notices. Drop them. One by one, the chains struck the floor. The sound did not satisfy Maren. It was too small beside everything those chains had done. Yselle's eyes flashed. You cannot govern by guilt. Rhaelor looked at Maren's removed ring on the silver plate. No, he said. I governed by distance. It served you well. For the first time, Yselle's expression truly broke. The 6th bed from the far row began to shake. Not the 16th. Another one. Maren turned. The hidden ledger opened by itself, pages flicking past names, numbers, transfers, and burial marks. It stopped near the back where Maren had written only 3 words beside a row of empty shelter lines. Donor winter audit. Yselle went pale. Rhaelor saw it. Maren did too. The winter mercy beds darkened at once, every gold light drawing inward until the shelter seemed to hold a breath. Then all 40 bed frames carved the same sentence in frost. Audit was never for mercy. One of the dropped reclaimed chains began to crawl backward, not toward the debt officers, toward the beds. Black links scraped across the shelter floor, slow and certain, until the chain reached the space between the 6th bed and the 16th. There it stopped, curled like a sleeping serpent, and turned white with frost. The young debt officer stumbled away from it. Maren did not. She had seen chains pretend to be law before. The hidden ledger lay open in her hands, its pages trembling though there was no wind inside the pack winter shelter. Every mercy bed had gone dim, drawing its warmth inward, as if the hall itself had become a held breath. Rhaelor looked at the frost-carved words across the bed frames. Then he looked at Yselle. What was the donor winter audit? Yselle's face had regained its poise, but not its color. A review of shelter efficiency. Maren turned a page. The ledger answered before she could. Gold lines rose from the rough paper and stretched through the air, connecting bed numbers to donor stones outside, donor stones to debt notices to reclaim chains to gray wolf-hide officers waiting beside the door. Not mercy. A map. Maren's voice went cold. It was a hunting chart. Yselle's eyes sharpened. It was inventory control. The returned people behind Maren recoiled from that phrase as if it had touched their skin. Marda Vale lifted her cane. Inventory is wool, not women, Ansel Reed said. Not broken legs. Mirith Fenn stepped forward last. Not widows who refused winter beds in noble houses. The third mercy bed warmed under her voice. Not fully. Enough. Yselle turned on the witnesses. You were all removed from lawful process. No, Maren said. They were removed from sale. Rhaelor held out his hand toward the hidden ledger, then stopped himself before taking it. The restraint mattered. Maren saw it and kept the ledger in her own grip. Ask, she said. His jaw tightened. Will you let me read it? Not command. Ask. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably at the sound of their Alpha King requesting what he could have seized. Maren looked at him for one long breath. You may read the audit lines aloud, not the protected names. Yselle laughed softly. How convenient. Maren did not look away from Rhaelor. Names are not proof for nobles to consume. The winter mercy beds pulsed once. Rhaelor accepted the ledger from Maren with both hands. He opened to the marked section. His face changed on the first line. Bed 1, former spinner, hand failure, reclaim probability high if sun's pressured. Marda's mouth hardened. Rhaelor read the second. Bed 2, quarry worker, mobility damaged, labor value reduced but bonehouse transferable. Ansel closed his eyes. The shelter grew colder with every line. Bed 3, Rhaelor said, voice roughening. Widow. Refused carven winter bond. Marked recoverable through fraud accusation. Myrith lifted her chin. Rhaelor's hand tightened around the ledger. Maren's voice cut gently, but not softly. Keep reading. He did. Line after line. Not names. Wounds. Uses. Vulnerabilities. The audit had not measured blankets, grain, hearthwood, or medicine. It had measured how easily the people in the mercy beds could be reclaimed if Maren's protection was removed. Rhaelor stopped at the 16th entry. His silence told Maren what he had found. Read it, she said. He looked at her. She did not spare him. He read, Shelter 16, held in Kain House before winter opening. Name suppressed by donor office. Reclaim may proceed if former Luna is removed from shelter authority. The words struck the hall harder than any shout. Yselle's expression became very still. Rhaelor lowered the ledger. Your audit required Maren's removal. Yselle spread her hands. Her interference made proper review impossible. Her mercy made your trade impossible, Maren said. The 16th bed flared gold. The frost curtains above Yselle cracked and fell in glittering pieces. A grey-dead captain reached for one of the chains on the floor. Rhaelor's wolf shadow moved before his body did. The black shape crossed the shelter in silence and placed one massive paw over the chain. The captain froze. Rhaelor did not raise his voice. Try again, and I will let the shelter decide what your hand has carried. The captain stepped back. Maren looked at Rhaelor, and for the first time that day, she saw not only guilt in him, but fear. Not of losing face, of understanding how much had lived under his seal. Good. Let it frighten him. Yselle turned to the nobles. You are all fools if you let a cast-off Luna turn charity into rebellion. Today she protects debt fugitives. Tomorrow every worker who dislikes winter labor will claim a mercy bed. Maren closed the ledger with one hand. No one claimed a bed to escape work. They came because law had become a buyer's rope. The beds answered by lifting their blankets. On a be'on. Under each blanket lay something small. A strip of wool, a cracked spoon, a glove missing 2 fingers, a washerwoman's token, a quarry nail, a widow's torn bond clasp. Not treasures, not relics. The last things people had carried when they arrived, desperate enough to be counted as empty. The nobles looked at the objects and found no clean way to dismiss them. Maren pointed to the rows. If mercy vanished, why do the beds remember names? No one answered. Yselle did. Not with words, with movement. Her hand went to the silver plate. To Maren's ring. Rhaelor stepped forward. Yselle. Too late. Yselle snatched the ring and drove its inner edge against the hidden ledger's spine. Pearl grey light flashed. The ledger split open. Pages tore free, not falling, but flying toward the hearth as if pulled by invisible hooks. Maren Lunget. Rhaelor caught one burning page bare-handed before it reached flame. His skin seared. He did not let go. Maren seized another. Marda struck a third from the air with her cane. Ansel pinned two under his crutch. Myrith caught the 16th page against her chest and held it there, even as pearl fire licked its edge. The winter mercy beds blazed gold. Not beneath nobles, beneath the returned people. Yselle backed toward the hearth, Maren's ring still in her hand, pearl grey light leaking between her fingers. If the ledger survives, she whispered, so does every claim against us. Maren looked at the ring in Yselle's hand, then at Rhaelor's burned palm, then at the people holding pages because she had once held them. Not against you, Maren said. For them. The 16th page in Myrith's hands unfolded by itself. Across its scorched surface, a new line appeared in gold. Shelter authority may transfer only to those it protected. The silver plate overturned first. Maren's removed ring slid across the shelter floor in a pale flash, knocked loose from Yselle's hand when the winter mercy beds blazed gold. It spun once between the rows, past Rhaelor's burned palm, and came to rest beside Marda Vale's cane. No noble reached for it. Not this time. The returned people stood among the beds with torn ledger pages pressed to their chests, hands, canes, and crutches. Gold warmth rose beneath their boots, not as reward, not as worship, but as recognition of shelter given when law had refused it. Yselle stared at them as if poverty had become an army. This is unlawful, she said. Myrith Fenn laughed once. It was a small, hard sound. You called us unlawful when we were hungry. You called us unlawful when we refused your houses. You called us unlawful when Maren kept us alive. Ansel Reed lifted the scorched pages under his crutch. Maybe law has been standing in the wrong place. A murmur moved through the nobles. Rhaelor looked at the ring near Marda's cane, then at Maren. He did not pick it up. Good. Maren would have hated him for trying to make that gesture holy. Yselle saw the danger and changed tactics. My king, the shelter cannot transfer authority to debt fugitives, widows, broken laborers, and banished women. They are beneficiaries. They cannot govern the institution that fed them. Maren turned toward her, because if they can govern it, donors can no longer sell access. The shelter doors shook under a gust of winter wind. Outside, the donation stones cracked again. This time they did not merely split. Names began to fall off them. Garvin, Kain, Vale, Morth. Every noble house that had carved itself into mercy watched its letters crumble into snow. Lord Carvin staggered toward the doors. Stop this. The nearest mercy bed froze before he crossed the aisle. Marda bent slowly and picked up Maren's ring with two crooked fingers. For a moment, the old woman held the symbol every noble had feared touching. The ring did not glow for her. It did not crown her. It only warmed enough to melt the frost from its inner curve. Marda looked at Maren. This was used to shame you. Yes, Maren said. Then it should not decide us. Marda placed the ring on the 16th bed, not on Maren's hand, not at Rhaelor's feet, on the bed that had waited for a name. The 16th bed warmed deeper. The gold light spread across the page Myrith held, then across Ansel's crutch, then to every small object under the blankets. Spoon, glove, nail, torn clasp, wool strip, hidden token. The shelter was not giving power to one woman. It was returning witness to the people whose survival had been counted as emptiness. Rhaelor read the line forming across the hidden ledger's broken spine. Transfer requires living consent of protected witnesses. Yselle's face went white. Maren understood why. A king could be pressured. A ledger could be burned. A donor stone could be recarved. But 40 living witnesses were harder to purchase at once, especially when the beds remembered what had been done to each of them. Rhaelor turned to the returned people. His voice was rough from smoke and shame. "What do you consent to?" Yselle snapped. "They cannot answer under emotional influence." Rhaelor did not look at her. "You answered under profit." The cut silenced the room. Marda stepped forward first. "I consent that no donor sees a shelter name before the person is safe." Ansel followed. "I consent that no work debt enters before healing law is read." Mirith's fingers closed around the 16th page. "I consent that widows and banished women are not listed for winter bonds." One by one, the others spoke. Not grandly, not cleanly. Some voices shook. Some words came out bitter. Some people refused to say more than yes. The beds accepted even that, because consent did not need elegance to be real. Gold lines moved from bedframe to bedframe, crossing the shelter floor into a new pattern. Not a crown. Not a donor ledger. A shelter circle. Yselle backed toward the hearth. Pearl gray fire still leaked from her sleeves, searching for loose pages to burn. "You will ruin winter order." Maren stepped into the shelter circle. "No, we are ending your market." Yselle's eyes turned sharp with panic. "If donor authority falls, the stores close. Grain houses will withdraw. Medicine accounts will freeze. You think mercy survives without noble coin?" Maren looked at the returned people, then at the beds, then at Rhaelor. "Mercy survived your coin by hiding from it." The truth struck harder because the beds warmed under it. Rhaelor bowed his head once, as if the shelter itself had passed judgment before he could. "Pack stores will supply the shelter directly until the witness circle writes new terms." Maren looked at him. "And when the nobles threaten your winter council?" "They will threaten," he said. "I will answer." "That is not enough." "No," he said. "It is a beginning." Yselle laughed, thin and cruel. "He says beginning because he knows what you refuse to say. The shelter still needs a keeper. The witnesses are weak, frightened, scattered. Maren will rule them from behind the same mercy she used to hide theft." Maren's face went still. The accusation had changed shape, but not purpose. Cold, manipulative, political, always some new word for a woman who did what men had failed to do. Marda turned toward Yselle. "Maren does not rule us." Ansel said, "She remembered us." Myrith lifted the 16th page. "And she refused to sell my name when selling it would have saved her faster." The 16th bed flared. The ring on its blanket cracked once. Rhaelor took a step forward. Maren lifted a hand without looking at him. He stopped. The ring split cleanly into two halves. Inside the hollow band, hidden beneath the royal silver, a pearl-gray thread uncoiled. Yselle froze. Maren stared at it. Rhaelor's face darkened with horror. The winter mercy beds carved one sentence across every warmed blanket. "Cast-off decree altered by Kain hand." The pearl-gray thread tried to crawl back into Yselle's sleeve. It moved like a living vein across the gold-lit blanket, slipping from the cracked ring with the quiet confidence of something that had escaped notice before. Maren saw it first. Then Marda's cane struck down, pinning the thread to the 16th bed. The bed burned gold under it. Yselle's breath caught. So did Rhaelor's. Maren looked at the split ring lying open on the blanket. For 7 winters, she had worn that silver band at feasts, funerals, council judgments, famine rationing, fever rites, and shelter nights. She had believed it cold only because royal silver was cold. Now she saw the pearl thread hidden inside its hollow. A foreign hand had lived in the symbol before the decree ever took it from her. Yselle recovered quickly. "A ceremonial repair thread. Rings crack. They are mended." Myrith Fenn lifted the scorched page from the hidden ledger. "Then why is it trying to run home?" No one laughed. The thread writhed beneath Marda's cane. Rhaelor stepped toward the 16th bed, his burned palm still blackened from saving the ledger page. What did it alter? The winter mercy beds did not answer him with light. They answered with record. The gold warmth across the bed thinned into a flat sheet of memory. Above the cracked ring, An image formed in the air. The decree table in Rhaelor's winter council chamber. Maren saw it and went still. The silver plate. The ring. The shelter ledger. Yselle's hand passing once above the decree before Rhaelor entered. A pearl-grey thread slipping from her sleeve into the hollow of the ring. Rhaelor's face hardened as he watched himself arrive in the memory. He looked tired there, angry in the way grief made kings dangerous. Yselle stood beside him with donor accounts stacked in neat piles and her voice lowered to the tone of sorrow made useful. Maren Dusk has made charity into faction. The poor are missing. The beds are empty. The pack sees coldness where it once saw lunar mercy. The memory showed Rhaelor reading the top page. Only the top page. Maren did not look away from that detail. Neither did the beds. The decree beneath the pearl thread changed while he held the quill. The first line had read, "Shelter accounts suspended pending donor audit." The pearl-grey thread tightened. The line became, "Maren Dusk stripped of lunar ring for misuse of winter mercy." A sound moved through the shelter, low and horrified. Rhaelor's voice was rough. "I signed the altered decree." Maren looked at him. "You signed the one that made it easier not to hear me." He closed his eyes once. Yes, the word did not fix anything, but it did not hide. Yselle turned sharply. "You were presented with evidence. Every donor account showed missing bodies, missing stores, missing coin. Because you made survival look like disappearance," Maren said. The beds pulsed. Rhaelor looked at Yselle. "You altered the cast-off decree." Yselle lifted her chin. "I corrected it to match what mercy had become under her." "No," Maren said. "You corrected the law until it sounded like your appetite." The returned people stood closer round the beds, the torn pages in their hands catching gold fire. Yselle's eyes flicked toward the door. Rhaelor saw. "So that was the first thread," he said. Maren's fingers tightened. "There are more?" The 16th bed answered. The memory above the ring shifted. Pages turned in the air. Not the public decree now. A second document lay beneath it, sealed with pearl-grey wax and stamped by donor houses. Yselle went very still. Rhaelor read the heading aloud. "Winter Shelter Transition Order." The shelter seemed to grow colder around the words. Maren stepped closer. "Read the body." Yselle's voice cut in. "That order is inactive." Marda pressed the cane harder over the thread. "Then it will not mind being read." Gold fire moved across the memory page. Rhaelor read. "Upon confirmed removal of Maren Dusk from Lunar Authority and Shelter Oversight, Pack Winter Shelter Administration transfers temporarily to Kain Mercy Office pending noble donor review." Ansel swore under his breath. Rhaelor continued, each line taking something from his face. "All unnamed beneficiaries subject to recovery verification. All empty beds subject to asset reassignment. All hidden stores subject to debt settlement." Maren stared at the words. Asset reassignment. Empty beds. That was what Yselle had wanted all along. Not only Maren disgraced. Not only noble names protected. The shelter itself converted into a recovery room for the very houses that had hunted the people it warmed. Yselle moved fast. She snatched the pearl thread from beneath Marda's cane, cutting her own palm on the ring's broken edge, and flung it toward the central hearth. Pearl-grey fire erupted where it landed, devouring the memory page from the edges inward. "Records burn," Yselle said. "Winter remains." Rhaelor lunged toward the hearth. Maren caught his wrist. He stopped, breathing hard. She felt the strength in him, the fury, the old instinct to fix by force. Once, that strength had made the kingdom feel safe. Today it had arrived late to a room already full of damage. "No," she said, "not you." His eyes snapped to hers. The shelter does not need another royal hand grabbing what it failed to guard. The words hurt him. He let them. Maren turned to the returned people. "Hold the pages up." One by one, they lifted the torn ledger sheets. Marda, Ansel, Mirith, the widows, the injured workers, the banished women, people, once counted empty, now stood with proof in their hands. The winter mercy beds answered them. Gold light surged from the mattresses into the raised pages. The pearl fire in the hearth shrank back as if starved of permission. The transition order reappeared in the air, no longer on royal parchment, but across every warmed bed. Yselle stared at the words spreading beyond her reach. Maren looked at her. You counted on paper burning. The 16th bed blazed. I counted on people living. The shelter doors burst open under a violent winter gust. Outside, men shouted. Not debt officers, workers, stonecutters from the outer yard, sent by the donor board before dawn. They dragged iron hooks, sledges, and dismantling chains meant for bed frames. Their foreman looked from Yselle to the glowing shelter and went pale. My lady, he said, we were told the empty beds were to be removed before sunrise. The transition order burned brighter across all 40 beds. Bed removal authorized upon cast-off decree. Maren looked at the iron hooks, then at Rhaelor. His face had gone ash-white. Yselle whispered, Mercy must be rebuilt clean. The beds began to frost at the legs. Not from noble touch, from threat, and beneath every pillow, something small and hidden began to knock. The first iron hook broke before it touched a bed. It struck the shelter threshold with a sound like a bell cracking under ice, and the foreman who carried it staggered backward, staring at the snapped metal in his hand. Behind him, the other workers stopped with dismantling chains hanging from their shoulders and winter fear in their eyes. They had come to remove empty furniture. They had found 40 beds remembering the living. The knocking beneath the pillows grew louder. Maren turned from the hearth. Do not touch the beds, she said. No one mistook her voice for pleading now. The 16th bed glowed at her side. On its blanket lay the split ring, the scorched ledger page, and the pearl-grey thread pinned beneath Marder's cane. Across every bed frame, the transition order still burned in gold and frost. Bed removal authorized upon cast-off decree. Rhaelor stared at the words as if they had been carved through his ribs. Yselle lifted her chin. The order was lawful once the cast-off decree stood. Maren looked at him, and the decree stood because you let it. Rhaelor did not defend himself. No bed leaves this shelter, he said. Yselle's smile returned, thin and desperate. Then you admit the former Luna's hidden system overrules royal administration. No, Maren said. The people the shelter protected overrule the people who tried to sell it. The beds answered, pillow after pillow lifted, not by hands, by stored warmth. Small things slid out onto the blankets, copper tags without names, scraps of travel cloth, worker tokens, widow clasps, elder meal knots, smokehouse thread, flour, cart seals, and plain wax strips marked only by shelter numbers. Each object had been hidden so a person could disappear from debt law long enough to survive. Maren walked between the rows. She did not touch every token. She did not need to. Marder Vale, she said. The first bed warmed. Unselreed. The second answered. Myrith Fen. The third answered. Then the returned people began naming themselves. Not to nobles, not to debt officers, to the shelter. One by one, the beds warmed under living voices. Some names were spoken clearly. Some were only initials. Some chose shelter numbers instead. The beds accepted each form, because protection did not require a person to be stripped bare before power. Yselle watched the gold spread and understood too late. The authority was moving without her permission. Not to Maren alone. To the witness circle. The hidden ledger rose from Maren's hands, pages torn and scorched but still bound by gold light. Across its broken spine, new words formed. Shelter authority transfers to protected witnesses. Donor access requires consent. Debt claims barred from winter mercy beds. The donation stones outside cracked one final time. This time, they fell. The sound rolled through the shelter like distant thunder. Lord Carven sank onto a bench, face grey. The dead captain stepped backward. My king, if donor authority is void, every reclaim notice tied to winter mercy, Is suspended, Rhaelor said. Maren looked at him. He corrected himself before she could. No. Voided where issued through donor access. Reviewed where harm was done. Read before the people named in them, if those people consent. The beds held their warmth. Not forgiveness. Acceptance of correct words. Yselle's pearl-grey fire snapped high in the hearth. You will collapse Winter Order for them? Rhaelor looked at the returned people. Winter Order collapsed when it required them to be hunted. Yselle laughed once, sharp enough to break. You think they will keep a shelter alive? They have no stores, no houses, no political weight. Mardar lifted her cane. We have memory. Ansel raised his crutch. We have names. Myrith touched the 16th bed. And we have what you feared most. Yselle's eyes narrowed. Myrith looked at Maren, a woman who would not sell us to save herself. The gold light surged. The pearl fire in the hearth went out. Yselle stepped back into sudden shadow. Rhaelor's guards moved, but Maren raised one hand. Not to protect Yselle, to protect the record. No blood in the shelter. Rhaelor obeyed at once. Lady Yselle Kain, you are stripped of donor authority, shelter access, and winter account seal. You will stand before every reclaimed name that consents to witness. Yselle's face twisted. You would let them judge me? Maren answered, No, the shelter already did. They will decide what of themselves you are allowed to hear. That frightened Yselle more than chains. Guards took her from the hearth, past the beds she had tried to empty, past the people she had counted as inventory. No one cheered. The returned witnesses watched her go with the silence of those who had learned survival did not need applause. When the doors closed, winter seemed to leave with her. The shelter warmed slowly, not brightly, honestly. Rhaelor walked to the silver plate and picked up the two halves of Maren's ring. He held them for a moment, then placed them on the hidden ledger instead of offering them to her. I cannot give this back as if it was only taken from your hand, he said. Maren stood across from him, the 16th bed between them. No. I believed Yselle. Yes. I signed the decree. Yes. I let you be judged in the place you had kept alive. Maren's voice did not soften. Yes. His throat worked. I will rebuild the shelter. She looked toward the returned people. You will face the people you let freeze first. Rhaelor bowed his head. Not to her as Luna. Not to the beds. To the truth he had arrived late enough to wound. I will. Maren believed that he meant it. She did not yet know whether that would be enough. Marder came forward and placed the split ring inside the shelter circle. This should not rule the beds. Maren looked at the old woman. No. Myrith added the 16th copper tag beside it. Ansel laid down the broken reclaim chain. Others followed with their tokens until the center of the shelter held a new record made not of noble stone, but of survived winter. The winter mercy beds glowed around them. Every bed warm. Every name protected by consent. Every empty blanket telling the truth at last. Rhaelor looked at Maren. May I stand with the shelter when they speak? Maren held his gaze for a long moment. Stand where they can see you, she said, and listen before you answer. It was not forgiveness. It was harder. A beginning with witnesses. Outside, snow fell over the broken donor stones, covering the carved noble names one by one. Inside, the shelter doors opened to the first true warmth of dawn. Maren Dusk did not put the ring back on. She walked between the winter mercy beds with the hidden ledger in her hands, no longer counting emptiness for shame. She counted the living, and this time, the shelter counted with her.